Xiaofang, from the article, we know that there are a lot of emergent multilingual learners in the United States.
Yeah, and I also know that these multilingual learners experience a lot of emotions in the English only classrooms due to their limited proficiency in English.
Yes, a large body of foreign language learning research has reported on the emotions that students experience as well as the positive and negative impacts of those emotions on learning. However, although there has been extensive research on emotions in foreign language learning contexts, little research exists on the emotional aspects of emergent multilingual learners' language learning. Safan, do you know emotional scaffolding?
Yeah, I know the emotional scaffolding. From the article, we can know that some scholars have proposed the concept of emotional scaffolding. In general, the emotional scaffolding is the teacher support strategies that help students recognize their emotions and utilize them to actively participate in the classroom activities and achieve their learning goals.
Yes, in second language learning context, the importance of teachers' emotional skills that reduce the language learner's negative emotions and boost positive emotions has also been emphasized. Safan, do you know translanguaging?
Yeah, translanguaging is a pedagogical practice that encourages the use of a student's entire language repertoire in and outside the classroom.
Yeah, translanguaging is a very important tool for emotional scaffolding with emergent multilingual learners because like recent studies have demonstrated that teachers' use of translanguaging pedagogy can contribute to reducing language learners' negative emotions and facilitating their immersion in academic tasks.
Yeah, and that's why this study aimed to explore how translanguaging strategies mediate the emergent multilingual learners' emotional well-being, alleviate the language learning anxiety, and reduce negative behaviors.
I want to talk about method. This study uses case stories which describe experience of two children from two Greenville elementary schools. One is Jessica and the other is Chanh, one female and one male in third and first grade respectively. Two multilingual participant researchers, Nguyen and Angela, Chen is a researcher, began working in district as a facilitator on translanguaging and multilingual ecology.
Yeah, another thing I want to talk with you is the data collection. The data for this article is part of a larger study examining the beliefs, experiences of Greenville's teachers and administrators with emergent multilingual learners from 2016 to 2018, and the method for the of this research uses is the case story method, which draws on the individual stories of practice by blending aspects of the classic case study method with the traditional storytelling. So we can say that this method can be interpreted as a combination of case study and narrative inquiry. This method draws heavily on the narrative inquiry, but still remains some key attributes of the case study. And the data analysis, the case stories were triangulated with member checks with relevant stakeholders like the parents, the classroom teachers, and the English second language or reading specialists. in addition to the analysis of student and author-generated artifacts.
Let's move on case stories. Xiaofang. Angela began working with Saint, a first-grade student at Central Elementary School in the spring of 2018. Angela's initial impressions of Change were that of a quiet and possibly shy child. Change's homeroom teachers assumed that Change was a quiet but competent student, but it was hard for her to track Change's real thoughts.
Yeah, being able to use his home language has a positive impact on the Shen's disposition, and Angela noted that he became more and more chatty with her as the weeks went on, and this was not only due to the home language use, but also due to the support of the English second language coordinators and the Spanish teacher. And the Spanish teacher was often with Angela, and Angela saw the role of the Spanish teacher's involvement on Shen's ability to express himself.
Therefore, the combination of emotional support provided by a Spanish teacher and home language use from Angela provided a complete emotional scaffolding for change, allowing him to open up and even begin to use some English to express his interest and his curiosity. Similar to Jessica's story as well as previous findings on home language use and immersion multilingual learner student engagement, change inner voice will increasingly revealed as a result of these regular interactions.
Mm, However, the Shen's relationships with other teachers were not always as harmonious. One day, Shen hit a substitute teacher with a bag that he was wagging around in a circle. The Spanish teacher explained that Shen was frequently antsy and would get up out of his seat and walk around the classroom without permission. She contributed this to his not understanding the rule and that his behavior did not seem respectful by our standards.
Hmm. And one more thing that I noticed is Angela emphasized that change behavior was that of any boy, and that the incident with the substitute teacher was most likely to boisterous accident rather than intentional. This contrast in thinking shows both the value of home support for assessing behavior issues in the school, as well as possible cultural differences that might lead stakeholders to analyze behaviors in different ways.
Yeah, whether Shen was experiencing negative emotion or whether he was simply expressing a high amount of energy that day, the Angela developed a behavior rubric in Mandarin, yes, the Chinese Mandarin, which was adapted from the school's list of expectations. And Angela, as a Spanish teacher, then implemented a rewarded-based system to encourage Shen to follow along with the expectations.
So I want to talk about discussion. These two case stories demonstrate the power of emotional scaffolding in immersion multilingual learners' home languages to identify and reflect upon both behavior and language related content and correspond to previous findings regarding both emotional scaffolding.
We also say that the emotional scaffolding, translanguaging, and the student-generated artifacts described in the case stories are part of a continuum that mediate both emergent multilingual learners' emotional well-being and the acquisition of the content. These findings emphasize the link between emotion and cognition, highlighting the role of positive facts in increasing classroom engagement. When considering the implication about this article, I think it has so much implications, like for the classroom teachers, the English second language staff, and other stakeholders. Our most important recommendation is to provide all emergent multilingual learners with some types of home language support. Secondly, we recommend that the teachers design in-classroom activities utilizing translanguage strategies in a way that allows the emergent multilingual learners to express their emotional experiences and produce creative artifacts. What about other implication, Chan?
Xiaofang, I totally agree with you because here we see the emotional scaffolding translanguaging towards the immersion multilingual learners play a key role in the AFL context. So another implication, we believe that student and volunteers generated multilingual artifacts can be engaged with repeatedly in and outside the classroom both as peer-to-peer support materials that help new emergent multilingual learners adapt to the school setting, as well as to enable teachers and monolingual peer understanding of emergent multilingual experience. And this really help the student to engage their interest and help them have more motivation when they take part in the classroom.
Yeah, so from the article, from this study, we can conclude that a lack of um, home language support for the emergent multilingual learners in the US can lead not only to issues with acquiring academic content, but also to profound emotional distress, frustration, and isolation. And the use of emotional scaffolding allows emergent multilingual learners to identify and reflect upon their emotional responses to challenging the monolingual classroom contexts and it also empowers them to use their language to express their ideas creatively and link these ideas to expressions in English.
I totally agree with you. Above, besides the above mentioned points, I want to add one more thing. It can be generate valuable multilingual artifacts that can be appreciated and reused by monolingual peers and newly arrived emergent multilingual learners. We hope that all schools with emergent multilingual learners, an increasingly reality in the United States, will take steps to harness these resources in their communities. Besides, we anticipate that future research will also continue uh, to delve into the power of translanguaging and emotional scaffolding for cultivating emerging multilingual learners' well-being for students at all levels.
Yeah, Chan, the emotional scaffolding is a really very useful strategy. So, will you use this strategy in your future teaching?
Uh, Personally, I think that this is very useful for me as well and other language teachers as well because for the emotional scaffolding for the translanguaging towards the immersion multilingual learners they really need them to enhance their results, achievement, and then not only in Vietnam but other countries like China or other ASEAN country, we can apply this emotional scaffolding and translanguaging in our own context.
Yeah, it is really an in-depth topic that we need to explore more. Yeah.